Good afternoon. Salon Spa Chat welcomes Dr. Marquita Qualls with us today, and Dr. Qualls is going to talk to us about how to successfully manage conflict. But I wanted to not be super formal because I know Marquita or Dr. Qualls from way, way back. We went to college together. She is an amazing young lady, so we're going to call her Marquita, but out of respect for her education and her amazing background, of course, we titled this blab, How to Successfully Manage Conflict with Dr. Marquita Qualls. So Dr. Qualls or Marquita, talk to us or tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you want us to know before we get into how to successfully manage conflict?
Okay, cool. I am a pretty laid back person. Most people, I can switch between being extremely laid back and extremely formal in terms of the business world. But I am a Mississippian, so Jennifer and I share that. We're native Mississippians. Erica went to school in Tennessee State University, Big Blue Tigers, and I'm a chemistry major by training. I did my undergraduate and my PhD in chemistry. I did my PhD at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana, and I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for several years before returning to, or not even returning to, but before pursuing this entrepreneurial route of Entropia Consulting. It has been fun and amazing, and I do things more so along the lines of leadership and professional development, because it really doesn't matter what industry that you're in, there's always the need to have and build your leadership skills or your professional development skills. Not even saying that you want to be a leader of the organization, to have a positional leadership, but developing some of those leadership skills that you need just to be successful in whatever it is that you're doing.
And so what are some areas of opportunities as we think about leadership and professional development? If I am 2 or 3 years into my career, what would you recommend I do in terms of leadership or professional development?
Communication is extremely important in how you present yourself. And so the communication either on the verbal communication, the nonverbal communication, and even written communication. How do people perceive you, and how are you perceived? Are you able to express, and I don't want to use communicate to communicate, but are you able to deliver your message? Are you able to ask for what you want in a way that's clear and people understand and can deliver upon what it is that you want? You know, a lot of times you think about leadership and leadership development and communication skills, and 2 or 3 years into your career, let's just say, I'm ready to have that next opportunity. I'm ready to go to the next level. Sometimes we aren't able to express how and what it is that we want. And so working with people to help you with those communication skills in order to be clear, concise, and very direct is really important for you in your career. It's also important to be able to learn how to talk with your teammates. Most of us are not working in a silo. Most of us, if you are working and not on your own entrepreneurially, you have teammates, you have coworkers. So how do you communicate with them? How do you talk to them? How do you, and it kind of gets into the whole conflict thing, but how do you deal with them in managing some of the relationships? So communication is probably one of the bigger things in your first couple of years, that I would say.
So the people who typically watch this Salon Spot Chat are people from the beauty industry or service industry. So hairstylists, barbers, estheticians, makeup artists, they do a lot of interacting with one-on-one and in group settings. So it's very important for them to be able to, one, communicate with their customers, and then two, communicate with either if they're working independently or with a manager in order to grow their business or to have a business or to have a successful or thriving business. So communication is very critical because it's that one-on-one communication that's going to make sure that, one, I'm listening, and then two, be able to translate into me being able to provide a final product to whoever customer I'm serving. So this information, those insights and those knowledge bombs that you dropped are amazing, because we think because I'm an artist, because I'm good at what I do, then communication may not be as important. But I think it's so critical, regardless of who we are still always learning and working to communicate better. That's something that's constantly evolving.
And Jen, the other thing is to pardon me cutting you off, but I wanted to kind of put a pin there. It's also the nonverbal communication that we do, particularly for those of us, I'm not me, I'm not in the service industry, I get served. But for those in the salon spa area, in the service industry, it's really important to keep in mind those nonverbal communications, or the body language that we give. That could make the difference between you getting a new customer. Did I lose you? I think I lost Jen.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Hi. Okay, no, it was just the nonverbal communication is almost as important in the service type industry as the verbal communication, because we have to really pay attention to what our body language is saying, and it really could be the difference between you getting a new customer or receiving or retaining customers. How do you treat them? Is it a smile? I mean, everyone isn't going to be happy-go-lucky every day with a smile, but a smile goes a long way for a service industry, because people want to be happy. People want to feel as though, number one, I'm paying for this service. So how you treat me, whether it's something that you are verbally saying, whether it's, the body language to you, whether you're leaning in or whether you're kind of distant, it really does make a difference. And so for people within the service industries, nonverbal is extremely important. And if you don't know what it is that you're doing, it's good to get feedback. So ask some of your customers or ask some of your friends every now and again, what's my nonverbal communication like?
And talk to us, Marquita, about written communication also, too, because we see a lot of people that I coach or interact with say, like, I don't want my clients to call me. I just want them to text me when I have an appointment available or to go online. So what insights or advice would you share about written communication, or how should that be managed?
Yeah, that's a tough one in this day and age, because everyone wants to be so quick. Everyone wants to text or send me a quick email. I don't really want to talk to you because it's easier to manage my time if I have you on my phone. I can just easily go through. But if you are on any type of texting mechanisms or any type of technology, I think it's important for the communication, once again, to be clear. Spell check, making sure that the timings, you have to look over it 2 or 3 or more times probably than just communicating, because once something is written and sent, especially if you're in the service industry and scheduling appointments, you may accidentally type 12:30 but mean to type 1:30. That makes a huge difference in someone's times, because if I schedule something thinking and I'm making a 12:30 appointment and it's actually 1:30, that's an hour now that I'm either going to be sitting in your establishment waiting, all because of a quick text that you sent out and didn't check.
So in terms of communication or just being cognizant of people's times, how can conflict come into play? And I know that's sort of like an interesting question, but what are some of the things that you've seen just on the consumer side, usage side, in terms of how you can manage conflict successfully as a service professional or as a professional overall?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because that one thing about people's time, when you think about conflict, what really is conflict? So I kind of use the definition of conflict being more so along the lines of it's a mental struggle. So whether it's internal conflict or external conflict, it really is a difference or struggle between your values, what you believe, what someone else believes. And so when those values don't align, that's when the conflict comes into play. When those desires or the wishes or the beliefs or wherever you are at that moment, anytime something happens, either within you or with someone else, and there's not the alignment, that's where conflict arises. So to your point or your example of from a service provider in the service industry, how can conflict arise over something as simple, what we say is as simple as a timing conflict or something scheduling that I put you down for 12:30, but it actually should have been 1:30, or I put you down for 1:30, excuse me, and it actually should have been 12:30. Your customer arrives at 12:30 waiting to be and wanting to be serviced, and you're like, well, I'm sorry, I wrote it down wrong. You'll just have to wait. Well, that's immediately starting a little bit of a conflict there because, number one, you're not being respectful of that person's time. Number two, just think about how you responded to that person. You never know what's going on in your customer. You never know what has happened in that customer, and the smallest of things could set them off, and it could go downhill extremely fast. So are you apologetic? Are you willing to compensate them in some way, form, or fashion for this error on your part of the conflict? So those are some of the things that you'll have to think about and work through. Simply saying, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, that may not always cut it for someone who is paying for the service and an hour out of their time. So it kind of depends upon what type of service that you're in and the quality of the services that you have and what people have come to expect. So if I'm going to a salon and my stylist doesn't double book, he has one client at a time. I love it. I love that aspect. I love that part of his business model where it's a very personalized, catered experience. But on the occasion where he has written down something wrong, and maybe two of us show up at the same time, I want my appointment, the other person wants that appointment. There's conflict, not only potentially between me and my stylist, but also between me and the other customer. And you don't want that element in your salon either, because things could get, things can escalate, and you want to make sure that you're managing those things. So the first thing that you do, or one of the things that you do when you start thinking about conflict and what can you do, is ask a couple of questions. Sometimes you're having to ask these questions on the fly, on the spot. Sometimes you have time to think, but think about what happened. What actually happened? Ask yourself that. What was said? Did you say something? Did the client say something? Did the customer say something? Then think about, well, if they didn't say anything, was anything done? Did someone do something? So you're all kind of thinking about these questions in your head. What was said? What wasn't said? What was done? What was not done? These are the facts. And then everything else is really opinion, and it really kind of goes into, one of the other value sets, and then you can start to compromise or think about the compromise and making it a win-win situation. What's going to be good for me, the business owner? What's going to be good for the client? And you just kind of have to talk things through.
A lot of times the business owners think, well, my time is very valuable. I'm an expert. I'm an artist. They're going to have to understand, look, I'm here to provide a service to you, so you should be fortunate or happy that I'm providing a service for you. So it's no big deal that we have this difference of opinion and just work with me. So I think that one thing that you mentioned very early on was that you need to acknowledge and understand people's feelings. Look at their body language, because I think a lot of times in the service industry specifically, sometimes we're in a bind, like my hair is wet or I'm getting my nails done, so I have to be somewhere, so I have to sit there and suffer through this situation when there's some conflict that's arisen. But it's important that the service provider pay attention to the body language of their client, or look at those nonverbal cues and verbal cues in order to really understand, how do I address this situation, and ultimately I want a happy customer. Because we know in today's age, particularly if it's not a long-time client, if it's not a successful situation, I can immediately go onto Yelp or some type of review service and slam that service provider. So I think it's very important that we as service professionals really understand what conflict means to our business, what it means to our brand, and how to have some tools in order to be able to address it.
And conflict grows. It's the point that you make about, yes, you have a client that's sitting there, maybe their hair is wet or their nails are not quite done. The client is looking at their watch, kind of going through their phone, and occasionally you may overhear them on their phone talking to someone like, look, I've been here for too long, and this is just ridiculous. If there are other patrons in the establishment, as you start to converse with them, does this happen often? How long have you been coming here? Well, I'm just not going to come, or I'm not going to come to this location anymore. Even beyond the Yelp or the online feedback tools, you have to think about there are always other providers that can do what you do. You're not the only one in this business. And so if you do have the attitude of, well, hey, they just will have to understand, then you take that upon yourself where I don't need them. You know, you're one of those people that avoids conflict. But sometimes by avoiding the conflict and not addressing it, you lose business. And then you lose the business, then you'll be in a whole other type of conflict with yourself. Frustrations and trying to get out of that cycle only because you didn't address that initial customer conflict, whether it's small or whether it's large. And I would have to say it's better to address the conflict when it's on the ground stages rather than letting it blow up and grow. And then you have to deal with it later. As Barney Fife used to say, you have to nip it in the bud. Just wait. Do it at the beginning. Because as it escalates, there's so many other factors that come into play. And it just gets to be really complex and confusing and difficult.
Yes. So Optimus Prime, Eric, or Marathon Diva, please join us or hop on in and talk to Dr. Qualls or Marquita about how to successfully manage conflict. But I wanted to expand a little bit more, Marquita, on something that you said. You talked about internal conflict. And for me, that's been the biggest angst. I can eventually write an email or go to a person who I have been in a situation that maybe is not unpleasant or just causing some angst, but it's that internal conflict that we take to the job, that we take in all of our relationships that eventually shows up. So what are some of the things that you would like what would you advise or what's some counsel on managing internal conflict, successfully managing internal conflict?
Well, I must say that even though I am a doctor, it's a doctorate of philosophy and chemistry, I am not a medical professional, and nothing that I say should be taken as such. Always have to put that disclaimer out there, particularly when you get into this area of offering advice or recommendations for something along the lines of conflict and internal conflict. So I would say that you first really have to identify the root. What's the root cause? Be honest with yourself, whether you journal, whether you have a trusted confidant or friend that you can kind of talk to. Get to the root of what's causing that conflict or what's causing that internal pull, the internal misalignment or disagreement. Because if you are experiencing something internally, it's generally because you're facing a situation that is going against your values, your morals, your interests. So I really know this has to be done, but it's not something that I necessarily agree with. So how do I overcome that? How do I get past having to do something that I know in my heart of heart or core that I really don't want to do? Or it may be the case of something that you're just not comfortable. A lot of times we have that conflict or experiencing the internal conflict for things that we're not comfortable about. We can build confidence by building the skill set around those areas. But like I say, one of the things about conflict and addressing the conflict, you really have to acknowledge it first. And once you acknowledge it, whether you acknowledge it to yourself in writing or to someone else, get it out there. Once it's out there, then you can kind of backtrack to the root cause of the matter. You may have to do some compromise with yourself or, make it a win-win, but identifying what it is.
What I've seen too from a lot of younger service professionals, a lot of the younger hairstylists that I talk to, they are scared to death to deal with their own internal conflicts. So they'll say, I'm very shy. I let people run all over me. I won't speak up for myself in terms of getting compensated appropriately. So then it creates stress. It creates dis-ease. It creates all kinds of things. And then again, they ultimately take that shows up in their work. So they're not willing to invest. I shouldn't say not willing, just probably don't have the appropriate skills of how to just don't know what to do in terms of managing that internal conflict. And again, it eventually shows up in their business. And I always say in this business, in the beauty industry, because it's so hands-on and you are transferring your energy to another client, they can automatically pick up on that. I can remember so many times as I'm sitting in a chair or getting a massage particularly, and I'm like, what's going on? What's wrong? Right. You're not on your game today. Like, because I can feel it. And then, you get the story and that just becomes interesting and you want to try to help them, but they ultimately just have to take it on themselves just to figure out what to do. So that's always
that whole transfer of energy thing. So you're going to get relaxed. They're not there. They're transferring the industry onto you. And now you walk out sometimes even heavier than you were going in. And then you're not satisfied with the service, not because of the person, but you paid for this service. Now I need to be compensated in some kind of way. I've served as your therapist. I have taken all of this negative energy from you. Now you transfer it to me. Now I need another session. What are we going to do about this?
Yep.
To your question, though, of the younger stylists, the newer stylists, and what is it that they can do, goes back to the leadership and development skills. Kind of interesting how all this plays together. It's about being more assertive in communication. What is it that you want? And it might be the case that you need to take a couple of classes on how do I get what I want, asking for what I want and actually getting it. And again, in the service industry, everybody wants to barter. People want something for nothing in these days, and it's about negotiation. Customers are sometimes the better negotiators because the service providers just feel as though, you know what, I don't want the hassle, I'll give in. But even as a service provider, you have to learn how to be a good negotiator and be firm in what it is that you're doing. You have to know your value, know your worth. If you're a great service provider, if you're always on time, if you provide quality, high quality services, if you run into a customer, particularly new customers, that want to come and negotiate on services or prices, then you have to stand firm in what it is that you're offering. And you can say, hey, no, my prices are pretty set, but perhaps we could work something else out or do X, Y, and Z. But don't lessen your value or your worth just because a customer asks and you don't want to deal with potential conflict. Because again, that conflict that you're thinking about is going to be between you and the client. Well, when you give in to their wishes, now you have internal conflict, which is worse because they're going on about their way. You're having to deal with it day in or day out for the next couple of clients. And then you're like, oh my gosh, why did I just do that? I just should have said no. So you play that in your head all throughout the day. You lose focus. And as you said, you have other clients. Then your service quality is hit for the other clients. And it just kind of goes down here. But be assertive. Know what it is that you want. Know your value. Know your worth. And be firm in that.
And sometimes that one or two negative interactions, or not negative, unfavorable interactions, or you as a service provider or the business owner not doing what you wanted to do can translate for years, weeks, months into your business because you have in the back of my mind, well, I don't do well at negotiating, or I just always give in, or I just whatever the stories are that you create, then you have to remove those stories because they show up in your business.
That's true.
You are in the position of authority. You own that chair. You own that service. So it's important for you to show up, as Jackie Bernardi, who's a co-host on this show, says, always show up pro. If it's a situation where it's conflict, you have the back room, you can step out and go and re-engage and get yourself and come back in, be ready to hit the floor and be ready to be an expert, because it's so important as a service provider, as a stylist or beauty professional, to always be true to yourself, be true to your business, because that's your brand, your business, your reputation.
That's right.
I mean, and it's okay. You have to also be honest to say, well, I didn't handle this properly. This was a situation where there was some conflict present. how do I move forward? How do I address it? As Marquita just laid out 3 different points. What was said, what were the actions taken, and what was the other one? What happened, what was said, and what were the actions taken in order to be able to go back, reevaluate the situation, and then move forward. Hopefully take some learnings into the next interaction. So that's really, really essential.
And it's important to have a group of people that you can bounce ideas and talk to. You need, whether it's your fellow salon mates, whether there are friends, you kind of go back and play out these scenarios and let people give you feedback, especially if you don't know how to handle it. It's like, well, Jennifer, how would you have handled this? This happened at work today. This happened with a client. And I'm not sure, I wanted to avoid conflict, but in doing so, I think I caused more conflict with me. What would you have done? And so the more perspectives or more ideas that you can have about how to handle these types of situations, it will help you for future situations, because trust me, they'll happen again.
I just remember early on in my career, I internalized everything, that internal conflict. I internalized everything, and I had people that I could bounce ideas off, but they were my peers. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have people who were senior. So I think it's very important to have someone in the industry who understands the nuances and the type of situations that you might come up with, favorable and unfavorable, as well as someone outside. Because if it's someone outside, they're completely objective. They're not closely tied to it, and they can often provide a different perspective. So as Marquita said, it's really important to ask the questions. How would you have handled this? What could I do differently? What are some learnings that I can take into? What are some tools that I could possibly use? Mm-hmm. I always talk about, and I try to practice this often. Whenever conflict arises, because I am by nature non-confrontational, mm-hmm. even though I like to talk, and I just don't like confrontation. I have learned to breathe. So like a lot of times it's in a situation that's not favorable, and I'm just sitting there because I'm breathing. So you'll see me breathe, and I'm just trying to breathe through the situation before I respond. Sometimes they can make the situation even worse because then people think you're ignoring them. But I have to be honest with myself. I have to be honest with myself and really honor myself first in order to be able to address whatever's going on. So I really think you have to first serve yourself first, and then in order to be able to address the situation. So whatever that is, if it's a funky email, a funky text message, a funky interaction, say, Marquita, with all due respect, I understand that we're having a disagreement. Can you just allow me a moment to process this? And when you're honest, people respect that, and then come back and try to address the situation.
Yeah. I think, and it goes back to the body language thing too. You really have to be aware of the body language, because something that you said, you sitting there breathing and not saying anything and just trying to collect your thoughts and get you together could easily be taken by someone else as she's not listening to me, she has disengaged, when that's not really the case. So in some instances, especially if you are in a large group setting around a table or something, it may just be something as simple for you saying, hey, you know what, let me just take a moment to think about this. So I just need to I need to take a few moments to think about it. And even in saying how you say that may be perceived in a different manner and make the conflict level arise. But at least you've acknowledged that I haven't disengaged. I'm just taking a few moments to really take it in and reflect and process this before I respond, because I want to be fair to myself and fair to you in terms of how these next steps go. Because it could go either way, depending upon how you respond. It could either be better or it could be bitter. And we always want to strive for better.
And I cannot state it enough, and I know you believe this to be true, is when you make eye contact with people, that's so important. If you're standing there with your arms crossed or your body language is closed off, just as Marquita said, the nonverbal communication is equally important as the verbal communication. Mm-hmm. So we know in the service industry, we try not to roll our eyes or smack our lips, or just your facial expressions are so essential, frowning, whatever is necessary to try to remain pleasant and professional at all times is so critical, because when you own, you own the situation. You can let the situation control you, or you can control the situation in those instances where there are conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very important.
I talked about the styles a bit on, I work with people, and whenever I do presentations or workshops or seminars, there are 5 conflict styles. And so I just want to briefly talk about those 5 styles.